I found my best friend's phone in a dumpster, covered in his blood. The last message made my hands shake coordinates to the federal building downtown and a countdown timer. 23 minutes. I'd defused bombs in Afghanistan, but I never thought I'd be racing against one planted by the man who saved my life overseas. My name is Ryan Torres, 43 years old, Army EOD specialist. This is how I discovered my closest friend was being forced to commit an act of terror, and how everything I learned in war zones came down to one impossible choice. It started 3 days earlier at our weekly poker game. David seemed off-jumpy, checking his phone every few minutes, stepping outside for hushed conversations. When I asked what was eating at him, he just shrugged and said work stress. I should have pushed harder. I should have known something was wrong when he left his beer, half finished, and bolted out of my garage, like the devil himself was chasing him. Like, comment with your thoughts and subscribe. 3 days of silence. That's how long it took for the knot in my gut to turn into full-blown panic. David never went radio silent. In the 15 years since we'd gotten out of the Army, through divorces, job losses, and every other piece of civilian hell life threw at us, we talked at least every other day. Usually stupid stuff, sports, work complaints, reminiscing about the sandbox. But 3 days without a word? That wasn't David. I started with the basics. Called his cell straight to voicemail. Tried his work number they said he'd called. In sick Monday morning and hadn't been back. His ex-wife hadn't heard from him either, though she made it clear she didn't much care. By Wednesday evening, I was pacing my living room like a caged animal. Something was wrong. My gut had never steered me wrong in Afghanistan, and it was screaming now. I grabbed my keys and drove to David's apartment complex, one of those generic places with beige siding and names like Sunset Meadows, even though there wasn't a meadow for 20 miles. The landlord, a heavyset guy in paint-stained coveralls, was locking up the maintenance shed when I pulled up. Haven't seen David since Sunday, he said when I asked. Rent's due tomorrow, actually. You know where he is? Sunday, the night of our poker game. Can you let me into his apartment? I'm worried something happened. He shook his head. Can't do that, buddy. Not without a warrant or family permission. I drove through the neighborhood, checking every parking lot, every street corner where David might have left his car. Nothing. Then I remembered the grocery store where he always shopped, a 24-hour place about 10 minutes from his apartment. That's where I found his Honda Civic. The car sat under a flickering parking lot light, driver's door slightly ajar like he'd gotten out in a hurry, or been pulled out. The keys dangled from the ignition, and his wallet lay on the passenger seat. Credit cards, cash, everything still there. Whatever had happened to David, robbery wasn't the motive. I stood there in the empty parking lot, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and feeling the first real chill of fear creep up my spine. In Afghanistan, when someone disappeared like this, you usually found them in pieces. But this was suburban America, not a war zone, or so I thought. The store's night manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, remembered seeing the car there for at least 2 days, maybe 3. The security cameras had been broken for weeks, she said with an apologetic shrug. No help there. I called the police from the parking lot, but they weren't much interested in a missing person case involving a 43-year-old man who might just be on a bender somewhere. Give it another day or two, the desk sergeant advised. Most of these guys turn up with a hangover and a story. But I knew David. He didn't disappear. He didn't abandon his car with the keys in it. And he sure as hell didn't miss work without calling, standing there next to his empty Honda, staring at that open door. I felt the same ice-cold certainty I'd felt in Kandahar when our convoy took a wrong turn into an ambush. Something bad was coming, and I was already too late to stop it. I should have searched the area more thoroughly that night. I should have pushed the cops harder. I should have trusted my instincts from Sunday and followed David when he bolted from that poker game. But hindsight's always 20/20, isn't it? Instead, I went home and spent the night staring at the ceiling, my phone in my hand, waiting for David to call and tell me this was all some stupid misunderstanding. A call never came. By Thursday morning, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. That's when I decided to check the dumpsters, following a hunch born from many years of searching for high EDs in all the wrong places. I started with the dumpsters behind the grocery store where I'd found David's car. Nothing but rotting produce and the usual suburban garbage. But my gut kept pulling me toward the industrial. Area 6 blocks east, a maze of warehouses and loading docks where someone could dispose of evidence without being seen. The morning. Sun cast long shadows between the buildings as I methodically worked my way through each dumpster, that familiar hypervigilance from overseas kicking in. Every sound, every movement in my peripheral vision got cataloged and assessed. Not the fourth dumpster behind a closed auto parts store hit pay dirt. There, buried under a pile of greasy shop rags and cardboard boxes, I saw the distinctive blue case of David's phone. The same phone he'd been clutching during our poker game, checking obsessively every few minutes. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. The screen was spider-webbed with cracks, and dark stains covered the backstains that looked an awful lot like dried blood. A lot of it. The phone was locked, but I knew David's passcode. We'd shared them years ago, back when we were both going through messy divorces and needed someone to handle our affairs if things went south. His birthday backwards. 12:07. The screen flickered to life, and what I saw made my blood freeze. Last text thread showed coordinates 34.0522N, 118.2437W. Below that, a countdown timer that had already reached 0. But it was the timestamps that really got me. The conversation had ended 3 days ago. Right around the time David would have left my garage, I scrolled up through the messages, my heart pounding harder with each exchange. Package delivered. As instructed. Good. Timer is set for 72 hours from now. Do not deviate from the plan. What about after? You promised you'd leave them alone. Complete the job, then we'll discuss terms. The blood wasn't just on the outside of the phone. It was under David's fingernails in the photos his camera had accidentally taken during what must have been a struggle. I could make out parts of faces in the blurry images, rough men in dark clothing, the interior of a van, David's own terrified. Expression reflected in a window, but it was the final photo that stopped me cold. A picture of the federal building downtown, taken from the perspective of someone standing across the street. In the corner of the image, I could see David's reflection in a storefront window and the unmistakable outline of someone standing behind him, just out of frame. I zoomed in on the timestamp. The photo was taken exactly 72 hours before right now. The coordinates led to the federal building. The countdown timer had reached 0. And David was missing, his phone covered. In blood. My EOD training kicked in, automatically assess the threat, determine blast radius, calculate casualty estimates. The federal building housed FBI offices, ATF, immigration services, and a federal courthouse. On any given day, hundreds of people moved through that building. If someone had planted a device there, I fumbled for my own phone, fingers shaking, as I dialed 911, but as I started to speak, I stopped. What exactly was I going to tell them? That I found my missing friend's bloody phone with some coordinates and a timer that had already run out? That I suspected a bombing at a federal building based on text messages that could be interpreted a dozen different ways? They'd think I was having a PTSD episode. Hell, maybe I was, but those coordinates were burned into my retinas now. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, muscle memory was already calculating approach routes, evacuation procedures, and bomb placement probabilities the way I used to do in Fallujah, when we got word of a possible I.E.D. David had been forced into something. The blood on his phone proved he hadn't gone willingly. And now a 72-hour countdown had reached 0 at the Federal Building downtown. I pocketed the phone and ran for my truck, tires squealing as I pulled out of the industrial district. Traffic seemed to move in slow motion as I fought my way toward downtown, every red light an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles went white. 20 minutes later, I sat in my truck across the street from the Federal Building, staring up at its imposing concrete facade. It looked normal people walking in and out, security guards at their posts. Business as usual, no emergency vehicles. No evacuation. No sign that anything had gone wrong. But David's phone sat heavy in my pocket, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a crime scene that just hadn't happened yet. The Federal Building stood there like a concrete monument to American bureaucracy, all sharp angles and tiny windows, designed to look important and impenetrable. But I'd seen enough of these structures overseas to know their weaknesses. Load-bearing, columns, main entrances, parking structures. Places where a skilled bomber could bring down the entire building or create maximum casualties with minimal explosives. David knew these things too. We'd learned them together. The memories hit me like a freight train, sitting there in my truck, staring up at those government offices. Suddenly, I wasn't in downtown Los Angeles anymore. I was back in the dusty streets of Kandahar, sweating. Through my gear as David and I approached another suspicious package by the side of the road. Easy, Torres, David's voice echoed from 15 years ago. Red wire? Blue wire? Or do we call in the robot? He'd been the calm one back then. Steady. Hands and steadier nerves. I was the hothead who wanted to move fast, get it done, get our unit back to base safely. But David always made me slow down, think it through, consider every angle. The bomb's not going anywhere, he used to say. But if we screw this up, neither are we. We saved each other's lives more times than I could count over there. David talked me out of cutting the wrong wire outside Bagram. I pulled him behind cover 2 seconds before a daisy-chain-eyed took out the building we'd been standing next to. We were brothers in every way that mattered, bonded by sand and terror and the strange intimacy of people who've seen each other's worst fears and kept showing up anyway. When we came home, we promised we'd watch each other's backs. No matter what civilian life threw at us, we'd never have to face it alone. Through his divorce, my PTSD episodes, the job losses, and the nightmares, and all the ways this country forgot about guys like us. We had each other. So how had I missed the signs that someone was using him? I pulled David's phone back out, scrolling through those text messages again. The tone was all wrong for David. Clipped, formal, scared. The David I knew would have told whoever was threatening him to go to hell. Consequences be damned. But these messages read like someone with a gun to his head, following a script. Complete the job. Then we'll discuss terms. What terms? What job? And who the hell had enough leverage to turn David Montenegro, the same guy who told a colonel to shove it when ordered to clear a minefield without proper equipment into a compliant asset? The answer came to me as I studied the blood spatter patterns on the phone case. David wasn't just scared for himself. He was scared for someone else. Someone he'd died to protect. His sister Sarah. David's parents died in a car wreck when he was 22, leaving him to raise Sarah, who was only 16 at the time. She was the only family he had left, and now she had kids of her own twin boys, maybe 7 or 8 years old. David's whole world revolved around those kids. He coached their little league team, never missed a birthday, had their drawings plastered all over his refrigerator. If someone threatened Sarah's family, David would do anything to keep them safe, even plant a bomb in a federal building. But the timer had run out hours ago, and the building was still standing. Either David had failed to complete whatever task they'd given him, or this wasn't the real target. Maybe it was a test run, proof that they could control him. Maybe the coordinates were just meant to establish his compliance before they moved on to something bigger. My phone rang, making me jump so hard I nearly dropped David's phone. Unknown number. Torres. You found his phone. The voice was cold, professional, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. Took you longer than expected. Ice water ran through my veins. Who is this? Someone who knew David very well. Someone who's been watching you sit outside that federal building for the past 20 minutes, wondering why nothing happened. I spun around, scanning the street, the buildings, looking for whoever was watching me. Nothing seemed out of place, just morning commuters and office workers going about their day. What do you want? What I want is already done. David served his purpose. But you're an interesting development. EOD specialist, decorated veteran, exactly the kind of hero this country loves to see on the evening news. Where's David? A pause. Then a sound I'd heard too many times before, the distinct metallic click of a round being chambered. David made his choice. Now you get to make yours. Drive away, Torres. Forget what you found. Go home and live your quiet little civilian life, or join your friend. The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone and feeling the familiar weight of decision settling on my shoulders. In Afghanistan, these moments came down to split seconds advance or retreat, fight or flee, save your buddy or save yourself. But David wasn't just my buddy. He was my brother. And if someone thought they could use him and then throw him away, like garbage, they'd picked the wrong veterans to mess with. Back at my garage, I spread David's phone contents across my workbench like evidence at a crime scene. My old laptop hummed to life, running decryption software I'd picked up during my contracting days after the Army. If someone wanted to play games with encrypted messages and hidden threats, they'd chosen the wrong guy to mess with. The phone's metadata told a story that made my skin crawl. GPS coordinates showed David's movements over the past month, not just the federal building, but a half dozen other locations around the city. The convention center, LAX, the port, all high-value targets, all places where a coordinated attack could kill hundreds. But it was the hidden partition on the phone's memory that revealed the real nightmare. Military-grade encryption protected a folder labeled simply insurance. It took me 40 minutes and 3 different decryption protocols to crack it open. What I found inside made my hands shake worse than they had in combat photos. Dozens of them. Sarah's house from every angle. Her kids walking to school, backpacks bouncing, completely unaware they were being watched. Sarah herself leaving work, loading groceries into her car, living her normal suburban life while someone documented her every move with the cold precision of a hunter studying prey. The timestamps went back 6 weeks. Whoever had recruited David hadn't approached him randomly. They'd done their homework, identified his pressure points, and systematically built a case file on the one person he'd die to protect. Audio files filled the rest of the folder, conversations between David and his handler, recorded without David's knowledge. I plugged in headphones and listened to my best friend's voice crack with fear and desperation. Please, you don't understand. Sarah doesn't know anything about what I did overseas. She's completely innocent. Innocent people die every day, David. The question is whether you want your sister's family to be among them. I'll do whatever you want. Just leave them alone. I know you will. Because you're predictable. 15 years of brotherhood with Torres, 8 years of playing surrogate father to your nephews. A lifetime of putting others before yourself. It makes you useful. My blood boiled hearing that bastard analyzed David like a lab specimen, reducing 15 years of friendship to tactical intelligence. But it was the next exchange that really got me. The federal building was just a test. Proof that you can follow orders without getting caught. The real job is bigger. How much bigger? Veterans Day ceremony at the Civic Center. 3,000 attendees, including families of active military personnel. Live television coverage. Maximum symbolic impact. Veterans Day. Tomorrow. I ripped off the headphones and stared at the calendar on my wall. November 10th. In less than 24 hours, thousands of military families would gather at the Civic Center for the annual Veterans Day ceremony. Kids, spouses, grandparents, all there to honor the men and women who'd served. And someone was planning to turn it into a massacre. The final audio file was the worst. David's voice, broken and resigned. After I do this thing, after the ceremony ... You'll really leave Sarah alone? Complete your mission, and your sister's family disappears from our radar permanently. How do I know you'll keep your word? A cold laugh. Because dead men make terrible witnesses, David. You are never going. To survive this operation, the recording ended with the sound of David sobbing deep, wrenching sobs from a man who'd realized he was trapped between saving his family and becoming a mass murderer. A man who'd figured out he was meant to die either way. I sat in the silence of my garage, surrounded by the electronic ghosts of my best friend's final weeks, and felt something I hadn't experienced since Afghanistan. Pure, focused rage. The kind of anger that burned away fear and doubt and left only determination. They'd taken David, a man who'd served his country with honor, who'd saved countless lives overseas, and turned him into a weapon. They'd threatened children to force. His compliance. They'd planned to kill him after he'd outlived his usefulness. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed David was working alone. I opened the phone's message app and scrolled through the recent conversation thread one more time, memorizing every detail. The handler's number was encrypted, probably routing through multiple proxy servers. But the tactical approach was clear. Limited communication windows, dead drops for materials. A timeline that culminated at tomorrow's ceremony. David was supposed to be the trigger man, but David was gone, either dead or hidden somewhere. They thought no one would find him. The operation should have been blown, aborted, called off, unless they had a backup plan. Unless they'd anticipated that someone might come looking for David and found a way to use that search to their advantage. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Warehouse District, Pier 47, 1 hour. Come alone, or your friend's sister learns what happens to families who ask too many questions. They wanted me to follow David's trail. They'd been counting on it. And now they were offering me the same choice they'd given. Him compliance or consequences. But I wasn't David. I didn't have family they could threaten. I didn't have anything left to lose except the memory of a brother who trusted me to have his back. And unlike David, I was going in with my eyes open. The warehouse district at dusk felt like a ghost town. Empty loading docks stretched between buildings that looked like they hadn't seen legitimate business in years. Perfect place for a meet that nobody was supposed to walk away from. I parked 3 blocks away and approached Pier 47 on foot, every instinct from Kandahar firing at once. Check corners, watch roof lines. Assume every shadow hides a sniper. The weight of my Glock pressed against my ribs. I wasn't David, walking into this blind and defenseless. Pier 47 turned out to be an abandoned fish processing plant, its windows boarded up and covered with graffiti. But the loading dock showed. Recent tire tracks and fresh cigarette butts littered the ground near the entrance. Someone had been using this place. The side door stood slightly ajar. I slipped inside, letting my eyes adjust to the dim interior. The place reeked of rust and rotting fish, even after years of abandonment. Industrial equipment sat covered in tarps, and overhead, broken skylights let in shafts of fading sunlight that did more to create shadows than illuminate anything. You came. The voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness above me. I wasn't. Sure you would. Where's David? David served his purpose. The question now is whether you'll serve yours. I kept moving deeper into the building, using the machinery for cover, tracking the voice. Professional setup. He had the high ground and multiple escape routes. But he was talking too much, the way amateurs do when they think they're in control. What purpose is that? Tomorrow's ceremony needs a face, a hero turned villain. David was perfect decorated veteran, clean record, all the right psychological triggers for a PTSD breakdown narrative. But David got sloppy, left evidence where his friends could find it. I spotted movement on a catwalk 20 feet above. Just a glimpse, but enough to fix his position. So you need a new patsy. I need someone with the right skills to complete the mission and the right profile to take the blame. EOD specialist. With documented PTSD issues, best friend of the original bomber. The story writes itself. A spotlight blazed to life, blinding me. I dove behind a conveyor belt as automatic gunfire chewed up the concrete where I'd been standing. Muzzle flashes lit up the catwalk like a deadly light show. The device is already in place, the voice continued over the gunfire. Timer set for tomorrow morning, 10 minutes after the ceremony begins. Long enough for maximum attendance, short enough to catch the color guard presentation. Your job is simple: get close enough to arm the final trigger, then die heroically trying to stop your friend's plot. I low-crawled between machines, working my way toward a staircase that led to the upper level. And if I refuse? Sarah Montenegro and her boys disappear tonight. Car accident. Gas leak. Random home invasion. These things happen. The gunfire stopped. He was reloading. I sprinted for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Above me, footsteps echoed as he repositioned. David recorded everything, you know. I shouted up at him. Insurance policy. FB, I gets it all if anything. Happens to Sarah's family. Silence. Then a different kind of laughter, colder, more confident. David recorded what we let him record. Every conversation, every meeting, every photograph was carefully managed. The FBI will find exactly what we want them to find: evidence of a conspiracy between 2 unstable veterans planning the attack together. I reached the catwalk level and heard him moving toward the far end of the building. But his voice carried clearly in the industrial space. David's body will be discovered tomorrow afternoon. Apparent suicide, along with a confession detailing how you recruited him into your anti-government plot. Your death at the scene will be seen as the final act of a man consumed by guilt. Except I'm not going to die at the scene. No? 3 snipers have you in their crosshairs right now, Torres. You think this was a negotiation? Red laser dots danced across my chest, visible in the dusty air. Professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire. No escape routes. I'd walked into exactly the trap they'd laid for David. But unlike David, I'd come prepared for war. The flashbang grenade I'd pulled from my jacket pocket clattered across the metal catwalk, and I squeezed my eyes shut just as it detonated. In the chaos of blinding light and deafening noise that followed, I heard 3 things that told me everything I needed to know. Suppressed rifle shots missing their targets, confused shouting in what sounded like Russian, and somewhere in the distance, the unmistakable sound of David's voice screaming my name. The flashbang bought me maybe 10 seconds of chaos. I used every one of them that rolling off the catwalk. I hit the main floor hard and kept moving, muscle memory from a dozen firefights guiding me through the maze of abandoned equipment. The snipers would be repositioning, trying to reacquire their targets, but they'd lost their night vision advantage. David's voice had come from the back of the building, weak, but definitely alive. Whatever they'd done to him, wherever they'd been keeping him, he was here. Close. I found him in what used to be the plant's cold storage room, zip-tied to a chair and beaten to hell. Blood crusted around his nose and mouth, and his left eye was swollen shut. But when he saw me, that crooked grin I remembered from Afghanistan spread across his battered face. "Took you long enough, Hermano." "Had to stop for coffee," I whispered, cutting his restraints with my tactical knife. "Can you move?" "Better than I look." He struggled to his feet, wincing, but not by much. Outside the storage room, I could hear boots on metal. They were coming. Multiple contacts, coordinated movement, professional sweep patterns. These weren't street thugs or weekend militia types. This was a trained unit. "How many?" I asked. "Handler plus 4 shooters. Maybe more outside." David's voice was rough, but his mind was clear. "Ryan, they've got the whole thing wired. The bomb, the evidence, everything. We're not supposed to walk out of here." "Yeah, well, their intelligence was wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "They assumed you were working alone." I'd been preparing for this possibility since finding David's phone. 2 flashbangs, smoke grenades, and enough ammunition to fight our way out of a small war. The same loadout I'd carried on patrol in Kandahar, because some lessons you never forget. "The bomb's at the Civic Center," David said as we moved toward a window at the back of the storage room. "Memorial wall, behind the wreath display. Military grade, plastic explosive with a radio trigger. I was supposed to activate it during the color guard ceremony. Timer? Remote detonation. Handlers got the trigger. That complicated things. Even if we got out of here alive, even if we could convince the FBI this was real, the bomb could go off the moment they realized their operation was blown. Glass shattered as I put my elbow through the window. We were maybe 8 feet off the ground, doable, but David was hurt worse than he was letting on. "You go first," he said. "I'll cover, like hell. We go together or not at all." That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in hellish red. Through the broken window, I could see vehicles moving into position around the building, black SUVs with tinted windows, positioning for a clean kill zone. "Motion sensors," David said grimly. "They know where we are." The storage room door exploded. Inward, and automatic weapons fire filled the air where we'd been standing. We'd already gone through the window, but not gracefully. I hit the asphalt first and broke David's fall, both of us rolling behind a dumpster as bullets sparked off the metal around us. "Vehicle?" David gasped. 3 blocks north. "Can you make it?" He nodded, but I could see blood seeping through his shirt where they'd worked him over. Internal injuries, maybe broken ribs. He needed a hospital. Not a running gunfight, but the alternative was 3,000 people at tomorrow's ceremony, including kids who'd come to honor their parents' service. We moved fast and low, using parked cars and loading equipment for cover. Behind us, the warehouse lit up with muzzle flashes as they realized we escaped the kill box. Shouts in Russian confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't some domestic terror cell. This was foreign-sponsored, professional, and well-funded. My truck was where I'd left it. But as we approached the final block, David grabbed my arm. "Ryan, stop." 2 more SUVs sat, parked near my vehicle, engines running, occupants watching Nia. Street. They'd anticipated our escape route, positioned assets to cut us off. "How did they—" "They've been planning this for months," David said. "Every contingency, every possible response. They know us better than we know ourselves." We crouched behind an abandoned bus stop, trapped between the warehouse team behind us and the vehicle intercept ahead. In Afghanistan, this would have been a good time to call for air support or artillery. In downtown Los Angeles, we were on our own. That's when I realized what had been bothering me about the handler's voice during our warehouse conversation. The accent wasn't just Russian, it was specifically Spetsnaz, the inflection patterns I'd heard from captured operators in Syria. This wasn't just terrorism. This was warfare, conducted on American soil with American veterans as unwilling weapons. "David," I said quietly, Tomorrow's ceremony. Who's scheduled to speak? He thought for a moment. Secretary of Defense. Joint Chiefs? Governor? Why? Because this isn't about killing civilians. It's about decapitating military leadership while making it look like domestic terrorism. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Use traumatized veterans to attack a ceremony honoring veterans, destroying public trust in both the military and veteran community while eliminating key Pentagon officials. Classic destabilization strategy, right out of the Russian playbook. Had to get to the Civic Center. We had to find that bomb. And we had to do it before they realized their warehouse operation had failed and triggered the device remotely. The only question was how to get past the kill teams surrounding us. The storm drains saved us. David remembered them from his construction. There's a network of maintenance tunnels running beneath the industrial district. We found an access grate behind the bus stop and dropped into the concrete maze below. Straight level. This runs all the way to the Civic Center, David whispered as we moved through the narrow tunnel. Ankle-deep water splashing around our boots. Comes up 6 blocks from the Memorial Plaza. Above us, engines roared as the kill teams realized we'd vanished. Flashlight beams probed the darkness through storm grates, but they'd lost us in the labyrinth beneath the city. An hour later, we emerged through a maintenance shed in the Civic Center's service area. Dawn was breaking over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me too much of mortar flashes. In 4 hours, 3,000 people would gather here to honor our nation's veterans, including Sarah and her boys. She always brings them, David said, reading my expression. Every year since their dad deployed, it's tradition. The Civic Center sprawled across 2 city blocks' main plaza with a stage and memorial wall, surrounding buildings housing administrative, offices and meeting rooms. Perfect terrain for a mass casualty event, with limited escape routes and natural choke points that would maximize casualties. But it was also terrain I could read like a map. Where exactly did you place the device? I asked. David led me to the Memorial Wall, a curved structure of black granite inscribed with names of local service members killed in action. Wreaths and flowers covered the base, left by families and veteran organizations. Behind the main wreath display, he said, pointing to an elaborate arrangement of red and blue flowers positioned at the center of the wall, they made me hollow out the base, install the device inside the framework. I knelt beside the display, running my hands along the metal framework. There a panel that moved slightly when pressed. Inside, I could feel the hard edges of military-grade plastic explosive, maybe 10 pounds worth. Enough to bring down the memorial wall and kill everyone within 50 feet. Radio trigger? Cell phone detonator. Handler's got the number programmed into his phone. Standard remote detonation setup. The bomb would receive a call. Circuit would complete. Device would detonate. Simple, reliable, and impossible to stop once triggered unless you could physically cut the circuit. David, we need to call this in, get the area evacuated. He shook his head. They've thought of that too. The moment police or FBI show up, boom. Handler's got overwatch on the whole plaza. Any sign of official response, and he triggers the device early. I studied the memorial wall, calculating blast radius and casualty estimates. The device was positioned perfectly angled to bring down the granite wall onto the crowd while simultaneously destroying the stage where military leadership would be speaking. What about Sarah? Can you call her? Tell her not to come? I tried yesterday. She thinks I'm having another PTSD episode. Told me to get help. David's voice cracked. After everything they've put her through, the threatening calls, the surveillance, she thinks I'm losing it. A sound made us both freeze. Footsteps on gravel, multiple contacts, moving with tactical precision. They'd found us. We took cover. Behind the memorial wall, as armed figures emerged from 3 different directions, professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire, coordinated assault. These weren't the same Russians from the warehouse. Fresh team rested, probably the handler's insurance policy for exactly this scenario. Torres, Montenegro. The handler's voice echoed across the empty plaza. Enough games. You have one choice: activate the device now, or watch your families die. Families. Plural. My blood turned to ice as I realized what he meant. Through my scope, I could see more than just David's handler. In the administrative building overlooking the plaza, muzzle flashes reflected off windows. Snipers with clear lines of sight to the memorial wall. But that wasn't what made my hands shake. On the steps of the building across the plaza, I could see 2 small figures, David's nephews, probably dropped off early by Sarah for some school Veterans Day project. They sat on the concrete steps, playing with handheld games, completely unaware of the armed men positioning around them. How did they? Same way they got to me, David said grimly. Months of surveillance. They know our routines, our weaknesses, our pressure points. They've been 10 steps ahead since the beginning. 30 seconds, the handler shouted. Activate the device, or the children die first. Through my scope, I could see one of the snipers adjusting his position, rifle trained. On the steps where David's nephews sat, professional marksman, center mass targeting, no chance of a miss at that range. David was already moving toward the memorial display, his hands shaking as he reached for the hidden panel. I'm sorry, Ryan. I can't let them hurt those kids. I grabbed his wrist. There has to be another way. There is no other way. They've got us boxed in from every angle. We can't fight them all. Maybe we can't fight them all, I said, studying the tactical situation. But we don't have to. The handler had made one critical mistake. He'd positioned his assets for a clean kill zone, but in doing so, he'd also created overlapping blast radius zones. If I could get close enough to the memorial wall device, a controlled detonation might take out his overwatch positions while minimizing civilian casualties. It was a long shot. Hell, it was barely a shot at all. But it was the only play we had left. The solution came to me like it always did in combat, not as a complete plan, but as a series of tactical problems that needed solving in sequence. Problem 1, snipers with clear shots at David's nephews. Problem 2, handler with remote detonator for the main device. Problem 3, assault team, positioned to kill us the moment we moved. But there was a 4th problem they hadn't considered. I still had 1 flashbang grenade and enough plastic explosive in my jacket to create a diversion. David, can you get to those kids without being seen? He studied the terrain between our position and the administrative building. Service tunnel runs under the plaza. Comes up near the building's loading dock. Maybe. How long? 5 minutes if I push it. Do it. When you hear the fireworks, grab those boys and get them out of here. David started to protest, but I cut him off. This isn't a debate, hermano. Those kids are your family. I've got no one left to lose. That wasn't entirely true. I had him, and I had Sarah, and I had the memory of who we used to be before war and PTSD and civilian life tried to break us. But sometimes you have to lie to your best friend to save his life. I waited until David disappeared into the maintenance access before making my move. The C4 from my jacket went under the memorial display, right next to the main device. Not enough to disarm the bomb, but enough to create a shaped charge that would direct the explosion upward instead of outward. Basic demolition principle: control the blast direction to minimize collateral damage. Time's up, Torres. The handler's voice carried across the plaza. Activate the device now. Instead, I stood up and walked into the open, hands visible, heading directly toward the sniper positions. Classic sacrifice play draw their attention while David completed his mission. The first shot came from the administrative building, rifle crack echoing off the concrete walls. The bullet sparked off the pavement 2 feet to my left, a warning shot, but it told me everything I needed to know about the shooter's position and capabilities. Close enough. The handler shouted, "Stop where you are." I stopped, but not where he expected. I was standing directly over the maintenance axis where David had disappeared, 30 feet from the memorial wall, in perfect position for what came next. Where's Montenegro? Gone. Couldn't handle watching kids get murdered for his mistakes. The handler emerged from behind a concrete barrier, pistol drawn but not aimed. He was confident, professional, probably former Spetsnaz or GRU, the kind of operator who'd run dozens of missions like this in Chechnya or Georgia. "You think this is heroic?" he asked. "Sacrificing yourself for a ceremony that celebrates American imperialism?" "I think it beats working for whoever's paying you to kill children." He smiled cold, calculating, completely without humor. "Children die in every war, Torres. The only question is whether their deaths serve a purpose." That's when I heard the sound of a maintenance cover being moved somewhere behind the administrative building. David had reached the kids. Time to provide the distraction. I pulled the pin on my flashbang and rolled it toward the sniper positions, then dove for the memorial wall as the concussion wave knocked everyone flat. In the confusion that followed, I triggered the C4 under the display. The shaped charge worked exactly as designed, channeling the explosion upward in a column of fire and debris that took out the sniper nest on the administrative building's roof. The main device detonated simultaneously, but the blast went skyward instead of outward, showering the plaza with granite fragments instead of leveling it. Through the smoke and chaos, I could see the handler struggling to his feet, blood streaming from his ears, cell phone still clutched in his hand. He was trying to make a call, probably to back up assets, or maybe to trigger secondary devices at other locations. I put 3 rounds center mass before he could complete the connection. The assault team was down or scattered, their overwatch positions eliminated by the controlled detonation. But as the smoke cleared, I realized the plaza wasn't empty. Early morning joggers had gathered at the perimeter, drawn by the explosions. Security guards from nearby buildings were approaching with flashlights. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear sirens, police, fire department, probably FBI, responding to reports of explosions at the Civic Center. The operation was blown, but the war wasn't over. Whoever had recruited David and planned this attack wouldn't stop with one failed mission. They had other assets, other targets, other ways to destabilize American trust in its military and veterans. But that was a problem for tomorrow, not today. I'd kept 3,000 people from dying at a ceremony meant to honor their service. I'd saved David's family from becoming collateral damage in someone else's war. And I'd proven that sometimes the right 2 veterans in the right place at the right time can still make a difference, even if no one would ever know their names. David emerged from the administrative building with his nephews, both boys wide-eyed, but unhurt. Behind them, Sarah Montenegro came running across the plaza, her face a mixture of terror and relief. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe we might actually survive this thing. But as I watched David embrace his family, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The handler's cell phone, lying in a pool of blood 10 feet away. It was ringing. The phone rang 3 times before I worked up the nerve to answer it. Status report. The voice was different from the handler's, older, more authority, speaking English with a slight accent that could have been anywhere from Eastern Europe to Central Asia. I looked at David, who was still holding his nephews, trying to shield them from the smoke and debris scattered across the plaza. Sarah stood behind them, her face pale but determined, the way military spouses learn to be when everything goes sideways. "Handlers down," I said into the phone. "Operations blown." A pause. Then, "Torres, I presume. You've been more resourceful than anticipated. Who is this?" Someone who's been planning this operation far longer than you've been interfering with it. Tell me, do you feel heroic right now? Saving 3,000 people from a bomb that was never meant to kill them? Ice water ran through my veins. What do you mean? The Civic Center was a distraction. A way to draw American security resources to the wrong location while we completed our real objective. Through the smoke, I could see LAPD units racing toward. U.S. sirens wailing. Behind them, black SUVs that probably contained FBI tactical teams. The entire federal law enforcement apparatus was converging on our position. While you were playing hero at your little ceremony, the voice continued, my people were hitting the real targets. 3 simultaneous strikes. Beale Air Force Base, Naval Base Point Loma, March Air Reserve Base, each one using the same playbook. That worked so well with your friend David. The phone slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. They'd used us. All of it David's kidnapping, the warehouse, the Civic Center bomb, it was all misdirection. While we were focused on saving the veterans' day ceremony, they'd been using other compromised veterans to attack actual military installations. Ryan? David had seen my expression change. What is it? I picked up the phone, my hands shaking. How many? How many what, Torres? How many bases? How many assets we turned? How many American servicemen we convinced to attack their own installations? How many people are dead? That depends entirely on how quickly your government responds to our demands. The devices at all 3 bases are still active. Radio triggers, just like the one you disarmed here. 1 phone call from me, and 3 of California's most important military installations become smoking craters. Behind me, the first police officers had reached the plaza. They were shouting orders, establishing a perimeter, treating this like a terrorist attack scene. Which it was, just not the terrorist attack they thought they were responding to. What demands? Withdrawal of American forces from Ukraine. Lifting of sanctions against Russia. Recognition of our territorial claims in the Arctic. The usual diplomatic negotiations, conducted through more persuasive channels. You're holding military bases hostage. I'm ending a conflict that should have been resolved years ago. Your government has 90 minutes to begin compliance, or we trigger all 3 devices simultaneously. The line went dead. I stood there, in the middle of the chaos, surrounded by smoke and sirens and the scattered debris of our small victory, and realized we'd lost the war while winning a single battle. Ryan, David was shaking my shoulder. FBI's here. We need to get our story straight before they start asking questions. Special Agent Martinez looked like she'd been pulled out of bed and thrown into a crisis situation. She didn't fully understand. She wore a hastily assembled tactical vest over civilian clothes, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had probably taken 30 seconds to arrange. You're telling me this was all a diversion? She asked after I'd given her the abbreviated version of events. A fake terrorist attack to cover real ones? Check Beale, Point Loma, and March, I said. I guarantee you'll find compromised personnel and active devices at all 3 locations. She was already on her radio, coordinating with other federal agencies. But even as she worked, I could see the doubt in her eyes. The story was too complex, too unbelievable. 2 veterans, 1 missing for days, claiming to have uncovered an international conspiracy that reached into multiple military installations. Sir, one of her team members approached. Pentagon's confirming suspicious activity at all 3 bases you mentioned. They're going to DEFCON 3. Martinez looked at me with new respect and significantly more concern. How do we stop this? We don't, I said. Not unless we can find whoever's holding the trigger and take them down before the deadline. Which is when? I checked my watch. 87 minutes. That's when David stepped forward, his face grim with the kind of determination I hadn't seen since Afghanistan. I know where they are. During the weeks they had me, David said, his voice steady despite everything we'd been through. They didn't always blindfold me for transport. I saw enough to piece together their base of operations. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Where? Port of Los Angeles. Container ship registered out of Liberia, but flying Russian flags. Been sitting at anchor for 3 weeks, officially waiting for customs clearance that never comes. I knew the port massive complex of docks and container yards stretching for miles along the waterfront. Perfect place to hide a command center with multiple escape routes by land or sea. Ship name? Martinez asked. Neva Prospect. Dock 47, Terminal Island. Martinez was already coordinating with the Coast Guard and Port Authority, but I could see the logistical nightmare playing out on her face. Even with federal authority and emergency protocols, it would take time to mobilize enough assets too. Assault a fortified position on the water, that time we didn't have. How many hostiles? I asked David. Dozen, maybe 15. Professional operators, probably Spetsnaz or Wagner Group. Ships been retrofitted with communications equipment. Command. Center, armory. Defenses? Heavy machine guns on deck, RPGs below. Plus whatever naval assets they've got offshore for extraction. Martinez shook her head. This is a job for SEAL Team 6, not local law enforcement. We need to wait for proper backup. In 83 minutes, 3 military bases turn into parking lots, I said. How long for the SEALs to mobilize? 4 hours minimum. Then we're going alone. You're civilians. I can't authorize. You're not authorizing anything, David interrupted. We're volunteering. I looked at my best friend, battered, exhausted, probably running on adrenaline and spite, and saw the same determination that had gotten us through a dozen firefights in Afghanistan. We'd saved each other's lives over there, and now we had a chance to save thousands more. Sarah, David turned to his sister. Take the boys home. Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone except us. She started to protest, but David cut her off. This isn't a discussion. Ryan and I have work to finish. 20 minutes later, we were in the back of an FBI tactical van racing toward the port, wearing borrowed body armor and carrying weapons that felt familiar despite the years since we'd last used them in anger. Like riding a bicycle, David said, checking his rifle, except the bicycle shoots back. The port of Los Angeles at dawn looked like an industrial cathedral, massive cranes reaching toward the sky. Container ships lined up like floating cities, the whole complex humming with the kind of organized chaos that kept global commerce moving. Terminal Island sat at the heart of it all, connected to the mainland by bridges that could be easily monitored or blocked. If the Russians had chosen their position well, they'd have clear sight lines in all directions and multiple escape routes. Agent Martinez coordinated with port security as our convoy approached the perimeter. Neva Prospect is definitely there, she reported. 300 feet long, registered tonnage suggests significant modifications below deck. Through binoculars, I could see the ship clearly gray hull with rust stains, communications arrays that didn't belong on a cargo vessel, and guards on deck who moved with military precision. How do we approach? Martinez asked. I studied the tactical situation. Open water on 3 sides, narrow dock on the 4th. Any direct assault would be suicide against prepared positions. We don't, I said. They approach us. David looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Come again? They've got deadlines to meet. 90 minutes ago, they were negotiating from a position of strength, multiple active devices, secure command position. American military held hostage. Now their civic center. Operation is blown. Their handler is dead, and federal agencies know their location. So they're going to try to accelerate their timeline. Trigger the devices early, then run for international waters before the Coast Guard can interdict. Martinez nodded slowly. Which means they'll have to come to us. Exactly. We set up at the bridge choke point, let them run into a kill zone when they try to extract. But as I watched the ship through my scope, I saw something that changed everything. A helicopter was approaching from the south civilian aircraft, probably a news chopper, drawn by reports of explosions at the Civic Center. Standard media response to a breaking story, except the helicopter wasn't maintaining safe distance. It was descending toward the ship, and I could see figures on deck preparing to receive it. "That's not media," I said. David raised his binoculars. "Extraction bird. They're bugging out early." The helicopter touched down on the ship's deck, and immediately figures began emerging from below the command staff, abandoning their operation. Before federal forces could close the net. In 68 minutes, those devices would detonate automatically if no one was left to disarm them. We were out of time. "They're running," Martinez said, watching through her scope as more figures boarded the helicopter. "We can intercept them over water, force them down." "Won't matter," I said grimly. "Dead man switch. If they don't check in every hour, devices trigger automatically." David lowered his binoculars. "Then we board that ship before they can destroy the command center." "How?" "It's 300 yards of open water, and they've got heavy weapons. Same way we used to hit insurgent positions in Kandahar. Fast and hard, before they know we're coming." I looked at the tactical situation again. The helicopter was still loading passengers, but the ship's crew remained at their positions. If we could get aboard before they realized federal forces were closing in ... double quotes Martinez, we need a boat. Something fast, low profile. Port authorities got patrol craft, but not official vessels. Something that won't look like law enforcement. She understood immediately. There's a marina 2 clicks south. Coast Guard uses it for undercover operations. 20 minutes later, David and I were racing across the harbor in a cigarette boat that looked like it belonged to drug runners, but was actually equipped with enough firepower to take on a small navy. The kind of vessel that could approach a cargo ship without raising immediate alarms. "Just like the Euphrates," David shouted over the engine noise, referencing a river assault we'd conducted in Iraq, except with better boats and worse odds. The Neva prospect loomed larger as we approached, its hull rising like a steel cliff above the water. Through my scope, I could see guards on deck, but they were focused on the helicopter operation, not watching for threats from the water. Basic military principle: most people look out, not down. We came in fast and low, using the ship's bulk to shield us from observation. The cigarette boat's pilot, a Coast Guard operator who looked young enough to be my son, brought us alongside the cargo ship's stern with the kind of precision that would have impressed a Navy SEAL. 63 minutes, David said, checking his watch as we prepared to board. The ship's hull was pocked with rust and barnacles, but there were maintenance ladders welded to the steel plating. We went up fast, weapons ready, using hand signals and muscle memory from 100 similar operations. The deck was chaos. Helicopter rotors still turning, crew members rushing to load equipment and personnel. Everyone focused on extraction rather than security. Perfect conditions for a boarding action. We split up, David heading for the ship's bridge to secure communications. Me going below to find the command center where they'd be controlling the bombs. The interior of the ship had been completely retrofitted. What should have been cargo holds were now filled with computer equipment, radio gear, and enough weapons to outfit a small army. This wasn't just a terror operation. It was a forward operating base for Russian intelligence operations on the West Coast. I found the command center 3 decks down, a room full of monitors showing feeds from all 3 military bases. Video of the devices David and others like him had been forced to plant. Real-time views of American servicemen and women going about their duties, completely unaware that death was hidden among them. 2 operators sat at control consoles monitoring radio frequencies and maintaining contact with their assets. They looked up as I entered, hands moving toward sidearms, But combat reflexes developed in Fallujah are faster than terrorist reaction times. Don't, I said, rifle trained on center mass. Hands where I can see them. They complied, but I could. See calculation in their eyes. Professional operators, evaluating angles and distances, looking for opportunities. Disarm the devices, I ordered. The older one, probably the mission commander, smiled coldly. Even if we wanted to, we cannot. System is automated now. Dead man's switch is already armed. Then disarm the dead man's switch. Requires 2-key authentication. My colleague and I each have 1 key, but the keys are biometrically locked. I looked at the control panels, trying to understand the system. Multiple screens showed countdown timers, radio frequencies, and what looked like heartbeat monitors for the operators. Biometric how, retinal scan, and thumbprint. Every 30 minutes, we must both authenticate, or the system assumes we are dead or captured, and triggers all devices. Clever. Even if I captured them alive, forcing them to disarm the system would require their active cooperation. And if I killed them, the devices would trigger automatically. When's the next authentication? Window? He checked his screen. 17 minutes. Above us, I could hear gunfire. David must have run into resistance on the bridge. The helicopter was still on deck. I could hear the rotors spinning up, preparing for immediate departure. There is another way, the commander said quietly. I'm listening. My superiors expected this possibility. An American team of sufficient skill finding our operation, attempting to stop it. They provided ... an alternative. He gestured toward a red phone sitting on a separate console. Direct line to Moscow. You can negotiate terms for disarming the devices. Your government gets what we want, we stand down. What you want is the withdrawal of American forces from a sovereign nation. What we want is an end to American interference in regional affairs. Surely 3 military bases are worth avoiding a larger conflict. I stared at that red phone, understanding the impossible choice. They'd engineered, negotiate with terrorists and legitimize their methods, or let thousands of American service members die to preserve principles. The kind of choice that breaks governments and destroys presidencies. The kind of choice they'd forced David to make, scaled up to geopolitical proportions. 15 minutes, the commander said helpfully. Above us, the gunfire had stopped. Either David had secured the bridge, or something had happened to him. I was about to find out which. The ship's intercom crackled to life with David's voice. Ryan, bridge is secure. Helicopters grounded. Crews contained. How's it going down there? Relief flooded through me, but the tactical situation remained unchanged. 2 Russian operators, biometric locks, and 14 minutes until the next authentication window. Still working on it. I called back. The mission commander was watching me with the kind of patience that comes from having all the cards. His younger colleague kept glancing at the countdown timer, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air below deck. You know what your government will choose, the commander said conversationally. They always choose the expedient path. When American lives are at stake, better to negotiate with us and explain to 3,000 military families why their loved ones had to die for principles. He wasn't wrong. I'd seen enough political calculations in Afghanistan to know how this would play out. Some deputy secretary would pick up that red phone, make whatever promises were necessary to save the bases, then spend the next decade trying to minimize the precedent they'd set, unless there was a third option. A biometric system, I said. It requires both of you? Correct. Fail-safe against coercion or single-point failure. What happens if one of you dies after authentication? A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. System ... resets. Next authentication window moves to 60 minutes. But it doesn't trigger immediately? No. System assumes natural causes, allows. Time for replacement operator. I was starting to understand their setup. The Russians had built redundancy into their system, but they'd also created a vulnerability. If I could time it right, 12 minutes, the younger operator said nervously dot above us. I could hear helicopters approaching multiple aircraft, probably FBI tactical teams, finally mobilizing for the assault. But they'd be too late. Even if they took the ship, they couldn't force the Russians to disarm devices that were protected by biometric locks. That's when David's voice came over the intercom again. Ryan, you need to see something up here. Bridge has master controls for the whole operation. Can't leave right now. Kind of in the middle of negotiations. Trust me on this one, Hermano. You need to see this. I looked at the two Russians, calculating risks. The commander was calm, professional, probably wouldn't try anything stupid. His colleague was getting more nervous by the minute, which made him unpredictable. Move, I ordered, gesturing toward the door with my rifle. Both of you, we're taking a field trip. They hesitated, but when I chambered around, they complied. We moved through the ship's corridors, past rooms full of communications equipment and weapons caches that would have made a D agent weep with joy. The bridge was a chaos of captured Russian crew members zip-tied to bulkheads and David standing over a control console that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Look at this, he said, pointing to a master display. They've got real-time feeds from all three bases, but also from a dozen other locations. This isn't just about 3 bombs, Ryan. This is about a network. The screens showed feeds from military installations across the country: Pendleton, Edwards, Fort Hood, Norfolk Naval Base. Each one had a status indicator, most showing green, but some showing amber or red. How many assets do they have in place? I asked. The mission commander remained silent, but his colleague cracked under pressure. 15 bases. 47 compromised personnel. 3 years of preparation. David and I exchanged looks. This wasn't just terrorism, it was the opening move of a larger conflict, designed to cripple American military capability while providing plausible deniability for Russian involvement. 10 minutes, the commander said calmly. That's when I noticed something interesting about the master control system. While the individual bond controls required biometric authentication, the communication system was logged in under a single user account. David, can you patch this into FBI communications? Already working on it, he said, fingers flying over the keyboard. Give me 30 seconds. The ship shuddered as the FBI helicopters set down on deck. Heavy footsteps above us indicated tactical teams were boarding, but they'd need time to secure the ship and locate us below deck. Done, David said. FBI has full access to their database. Every compromised asset, every planned target, every piece of intelligence they've gathered. 8 minutes, the younger Russian said, his voice cracking with stress. I looked at the master display, at the dozens of American military personnel who'd been turned into unwilling weapons through blackmail and coercion. David's story repeated across the country, creating a network of sleeper agents, ready to destroy their own installations. But there was something else on the screen that caught my attention. A secondary timer counting down independently of the authentication windows. What's that? I asked, pointing to the display. The mission commander followed my gaze and paled. Automatic failsafe. If main operation is compromised, all devices trigger simultaneously. When? He checked the display, and for the first time since I'd entered the command center, I saw fear in his eyes. 6 minutes. David looked up from his position at the communications console. Ryan, we need to get off this ship. Now. But as I turned toward the exit, I realized there was one more thing I needed to do. Got something that would ensure the Russians never tried this operation again. 6 minutes to save 3 military bases and thousands of American lives. The automatic failsafe was counting down relentlessly, a final insurance policy designed to ensure that even if the operation was compromised, maximum damage would still be inflicted. Can we override it? I asked, studying the control panels. The mission commander shook his head. Requires Moscow authorization code. Only the Admiral has access. Which Admiral? Admiral Volkov, Northern Fleet Intelligence. He designed this operation. David looked up from the communications console, where he was still transferring Russian intelligence to the FBI. Ryan, even if we could contact Moscow, you think they're going to give us override codes? He was right. We needed a different approach. I studied the master display again, tracking the logic of the failsafe system. If the Russians had spent 3 years building this network, they wouldn't want to lose it all in a single operation. There had to be a way to preserve their assets for future use. The compromised personnel, I said to the younger Russian, whose nervousness was making him more talkative than his commander. Are they all supposed to die in the explosions? No, he answered before his commander could stop him. Some are extraction assets. Deep cover operatives meant to survive and continue intelligence gathering. That was the vulnerability I'd been looking for. David, can you access the individual device controls from the master system? Give me a minute. His fingers flew over the keyboard, decades of tech experience from his construction days coming in handy. Got it. I can see all device locations, timing systems, even individual trigger codes. Can you separate the failsafe triggers from the manual controls? Maybe. If I can isolate the communication protocols, double quotes, he paused, studying the code. Yeah, I think so. But it'll take more time than we have. 4 minutes. I looked at the 2 Russians, at David working frantically at the console, at the FBI tactical teams I could hear moving through the ship above us. Every option led to the same conclusion. We weren't going to disarm all the devices in time, but maybe we didn't have to disarm them. Maybe we just had to move them. David, instead of disarming the devices, can you change their targeting? He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Change their targeting how? Redirect the explosions away from personnel areas. Into empty buildings, training facilities, anywhere that won't cause casualties. That single quotes double quotes, he paused, thinking it through. Actually, brilliant. If I can access the individual timing systems, I can delay detonation long enough for base security to evacuate the affected areas. 3 minutes. The mission commander was watching our exchange with growing alarm. You cannot do this. The devices are hardened against tampering. Maybe against outside tampering, David said, his fingers flying over the controls. But not against system administrator access. Above us, the sound of boots on metal told me the FBI teams were getting closer. Agent Martinez's voice came over the ship's intercom. Command Center, this is FBI. We're securing the vessel. Stand down and prepare for extraction. Almost there, David muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked. If I can just redirect the blast vectors ... 2 minutes. That's when the younger Russian made his move. He lunged for a red emergency button on the wall, probably a manual trigger for the failsafe system. I put 2 rounds center mass before he could reach it, but the sound of gunfire in the enclosed space was deafening. David, got it. He shouted over the ringing in our ears. Devices are redirected. Explosions will hit empty training buildings, storage facilities, places where nobody should be during morning hours. 1 minute. The mission commander was staring at his dead colleague, then at the display, showing our modifications to his carefully planned operation. You have doomed thousands of Russian intelligence assets. Good, I said. The failsafe timer hit 0. On the master display, we watched as 15 explosions lit up across American military installations. But instead of hitting barracks, command centers, and personnel areas, the blasts destroyed empty buildings, training facilities, and storage warehouses. Spectacular fireballs that would make great television footage, but minimal casualties. FBI tactical team burst into the command center just as the last explosion flashed on screen. Agent Martinez took in the scene: 2 dead Russians, 1 zip-tied commander, and David and me standing over a console full of evidence. "Status?" she asked. "Bases are secure," I reported. "Devices detonated as planned, but we redirected them to minimize casualties. Full intelligence package is uploading to your servers now." She nodded, then keyed her radio. "All stations, this is command. Operation is contained. Begin processing assets for debriefing." But as the adrenaline started to fade, I realized our problems were just beginning. The Russians had just conducted the largest foreign intelligence operation on American soil since World War II. 47 compromised military personnel would need to be identified, debriefed, and probably court-martialed. 3 years of enemy intelligence gathering would have to be assessed and countered. And somewhere in Moscow, Admiral Volkov was probably already planning his next operation. The FBI debriefing lasted 18 hours. Agent Martinez and her team went through every detail of David's kidnapping, my investigation, and the assault on the Russian command ship. They were particularly interested in the intelligence we'd captured: terabytes of data detailing Russian operations across the West Coast. 47 compromised personnel, Martinez said, reviewing the preliminary analysis. Some volunteers, some coerced like David, some who don't even know they're being manipulated. It's going to take months to sort through all of this. David sat across from me in the FBI field office, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past. Weak, the physical beating was healing, but the psychological damage ran deeper. They'd turned him into a weapon against his own country, forced him to choose between his family and his oath. "What happens to the others?" he asked. "The guys like me who got forced into this." "Depends on their individual circumstances," Martinez replied diplomatically. "The ones who were coerced, who cooperated fully, who provided intelligence value, they'll probably face administrative action rather than criminal prosecution. And the ones who volunteered? That's a different conversation." Through the conference room window, I could see news vans lined up outside the building. The story had broken 6 hours ago. Russian intelligence operation thwarted, minimal casualties, heroic veterans save military bases. The kind of narrative that made for great television, but missed the real complexity of what had happened. "There's going to be a congressional hearing," Martinez continued. "Both of you will be called to testify about how this network operated, how many other assets might still be active." I thought about that Russian commander, sitting in a federal holding cell somewhere, probably negotiating his cooperation in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He'd give up some assets to demonstrate good faith, but hold back others for future leverage. What about Admiral Volkov? I asked. What about him? He's a serving Russian naval officer. We can't exactly extradite him for running intelligence operations. So, he just gets away with it? Martinez leaned back in her chair. "Welcome to the world of international espionage, Torres. The bad guys don't always face justice. Sometimes the best you can do is stop the immediate threat and try to prevent the next one." But as she spoke, something was bothering me about the whole operation. The Russians had spent 3 years building this network, recruited dozens of assets, positioned themselves for what should have been a devastating blow to American military capability. And then they'd blown it all on a single operation that was doomed to fail. "Agent Martinez," I said slowly, "what if this wasn't the real operation?" "What do you mean?" "Think about it. They spent 3 years building a network of assets, then burned them all in a single day. That's not how intelligence operations work. You don't throw away that kind of investment unless... Unless what? Unless the network was expendable. Unless... The real goal was something else entirely. David was following my logic. "You think this was all a distraction?" "I think this was a test. A way to identify and map American counterintelligence capabilities while making us think we'd won a major victory. Martinez frowned. That's a very paranoid way of looking at it. I spent 15 years in military intelligence, Agent Martinez. Paranoia is a professional qualification. She pulled out her laptop and began typing rapidly. Let me check something. The timing of this operation. It coincided with increased Russian naval activity in the Pacific, unusual diplomatic communications, and... She paused, reading something on her screen. Shit. What? 3 hours ago, while we were celebrating our victory here, Russian submarines surfaced simultaneously off the coasts of Alaska, California, and Hawaii. Official diplomatic protest against American military provocations in the Pacific. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. While we'd been focused on preventing terrorist attacks on military bases, the Russians had been positioning naval assets for a much larger confrontation. They weren't trying to destroy our military capability, I said. They were trying to provoke us into a response that would justify their naval deployment. A response like what? Like declaring a national security emergency. Like mobilizing Pacific Fleet assets. Like doing exactly what we probably did 3 hours ago when those submarines surfaced. Martinez was on her phone, talking rapidly to someone at higher authority levels. When she hung up, her face was grim. Pacific Fleet has been ordered to DEFCON 2. All available assets are moving to intercept positions around the Russian submarines. Is exactly what they wanted, David said quietly. But why? What's the endgame? That's when my phone rang. Unknown number, but after everything we'd been through, I was getting used to unexpected calls from dangerous people. Torres. Congratulations, gentlemen. The voice was older, more refined than the others I'd heard, speaking English with a kind of accent that came from elite education rather than street operations. You performed exactly as anticipated. Admiral Volkov, I presume. Indeed. I wanted to personally thank you for your service to the Russian Federation. Come again? Did you think we spent 3 years building a network of assets just to throw them away on a few bombs? The network was always expendable, Torres. The real prize was the reaction it would provoke. Through the conference room window, I could see military aircraft flying overhead, probably heading to bases that were now on high alert. Your Pacific Fleet is now positioned exactly where we need it, Volkov continued, responding to a threat that was designed to draw them out of port and into vulnerable positions. Vulnerable to what? That, my friend, is something you'll discover very soon. The line went dead. Agent Martinez was staring at me with dawning horror. We've been played. Outside, air raid sirens began to wail. The next 30 minutes felt like the longest half hour of my life. Emergency broadcasts interrupted regular programming. DEFCON 1. All military personnel report immediately. Civilian populations in coastal areas advised to seek shelter. The Cold War, nightmare we'd thought was buried with the Soviet Union, was suddenly very real and very present. Agent Martinez had us moved to the FBI's Emergency Command Center, where wall-mounted screens showed the tactical situation developing. In the Pacific, red icons marked Russian submarine positions off 3 coasts. Blue icons showed American naval assets racing to intercept, exactly as Admiral Volkov had predicted. How many submarines? I asked the operations officer coordinating the response. 12 confirmed contacts. Probably more we haven't detected yet. David was studying the display with the same tactical mind that had kept us alive in Afghanistan. They're not positioned for an attack, he said quietly. What do you mean? Look at the spacing. They're spread too thin for effective targeting, too close to shore for strategic missile launch. This isn't an attack formation. He was right. The Russian submarines were positioned like pieces on a chessboard, waiting for the American fleet to move into predetermined positions. It's a trap, I said. Agent Martinez was on multiple phones simultaneously. coordinating with Pentagon officials who were trying to understand what they were facing. Pacific Fleet is maintaining defensive posture, she reported. No aggressive action authorized without presidential approval, which they're not going to get, the operations officer added. President's been moved to the secure bunker. National Security Council is in emergency session. That's when the screens lit up with new contacts. Jesus Christ, someone whispered. Dozens of new red icons were appearing on the tactical display, not submarines this time, but surface vessels emerging from fog banks that shouldn't have existed in clear Pacific weather. How many ships? Martinez asked, still counting ... 43 vessels so far. Destroyers, cruisers, at least 2 aircraft carriers. The Russian Pacific Fleet had materialized out of nowhere, using some kind of advanced stealth technology or weather manipulation to mask their approach. While American attention was focused on the submarines, an entire naval task force had moved. Into position, range to American fleet, 12 nautical miles and closing. In international waters, but close enough for ship-to-ship missiles to reach their targets in minutes. The American Pacific Fleet was caught between the submarines below and the surface fleet approaching from the west. Admiral Volkov had engineered the perfect tactical situation. American forces drawn out of port by the terrorist threat, positioned exactly where Russian naval assets could engage them with maximum advantage. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Russian Admiral requesting direct communication with American Fleet Commander. Put it through, Martinez ordered. Admiral Volkov's voice filled the command center, speaking and accented, but perfect English. Admiral Patterson, this is Admiral Volkov. I believe we have matters to discuss. This is Patterson. You're in violation of international maritime law, Admiral. Withdraw your forces immediately. I think not. You see, Admiral, your fleet is currently in what chess players call check. You cannot attack my submarines without exposing your surface vessels to missile strikes. You cannot attack my surface fleet without exposing your submarines to torpedo attack. And you cannot withdraw without abandoning defensive positions around critical American ports. The tactical display showed the geometry of the trap. American. Forces were spread across 3 defensive positions, each one covering Russian submarines that were positioned to attack major ports if American ships moved away. What do you want, Volkov? What I have always wanted. American withdrawal from Pacific territories that do not belong to you. Specifically, your naval bases in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. That's not going to happen. No? Then perhaps you would prefer to explain to your president why the Pacific Fleet was destroyed in a single afternoon because of your tactical inflexibility. I was studying the display, looking for options the way we used to analyze insurgent positions in Iraq. There had to be a weakness in Volkov's setup, some vulnerability he hadn't considered. David, I said quietly, remember that convoy ambush outside Ramadi, when they had us pinned between the bridge and the IED field? He thought for a moment and smiled grimly. You want to do something incredibly stupid, don't you? The Russians are focused on the big picture. Fleet movements, submarine positions, missile ranges. But they're not thinking about individual assets. Like what? Like the fact that there are still American military personnel on that Russian command ship we captured. Martinez looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You want to go back to the ship? I want to use it. The Russians don't know we captured their intelligence intact. As far as Admiral Volkov knows, his command ship is still operational, still under Russian control. And you think you can do what with it? I think we can use their own communications network to feed false information to their fleet, make them think the tactical situation has changed. The operations officer was shaking his head. That's not how naval warfare works. You can't just bluff an entire fleet into withdrawing. You can if you make them think they're about to be attacked by forces they can't see. David was already working out the details. The ship's communication system is still linked to Russian naval networks. If we can make it look like American submarines are moving into attack positions. Submarines that don't exist, Martinez pointed out. Submarines that exist in their communication intercepts, I corrected. We don't need real submarines. We just need them to think we have real submarines. It was a long shot. Hell, it was barely a shot at all, but it was the only play we had left. 20 minutes later, David and I were back aboard the Neva Prospect, surrounded by FBI technicians and Navy intelligence officers who were trying to understand systems designed by Russian engineers. The captured command ship had become an improvised electronic warfare platform. The communication network is still active, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun reported. She was a Navy cryptographer who looked young enough to be my daughter, but had the kind of technical expertise that made admirals. Listen when she spoke. Russians haven't changed their encryption keys yet, probably because they think the ship is still under their control. What can we do with it? I asked. Depends what you want to accomplish. We can monitor their fleet communications, inject false data into their networks, maybe even spoof submarine contacts on their sonar systems. David was already working at one of the Russian consuls, his construction site tech experience translating surprisingly well to military electronics. Look at this, he said, pointing to a display showing Russian fleet positions. They're getting real-time updates from all their vessels, which means if we can make it look like American submarines are moving into attack positions, Fail. Have to respond, Lieutenant Commander Chun finished. Basic naval doctrine. You can't ignore submarine threats, even if you're not sure they're real. I studied the tactical display, trying to think like Admiral Volkov. He'd positioned his forces perfectly for the current situation. But what would he do if that situation changed? Can we make it look like Los Angeles-class attack submarines are approaching from the south? Probably. Their sonar operators would see the contacts, report them up the chain, force tactical adjustments. Give me 10 minutes to program the spoofing algorithms. While Chun worked, I watched the main tactical display showing the standoff in the Pacific. American and Russian fleets were maintaining their positions, neither side willing to make the first aggressive move. But time was on Russia's side. The longer this continued, the more political pressure would build for American concessions. Incoming communication, the FBI communications officer announced. Admiral Volkov requesting to speak with Ryan Torres directly. I looked at Agent Martinez, who nodded reluctantly. This is Torres. Ah, my resourceful American friend. I trust you're watching. The tactical situation developed with appropriate appreciation for its elegance. I'm watching you threaten American naval forces in international waters. I'm demonstrating the consequences of American overreach in the Pacific. Your government has 30 minutes to begin withdrawal negotiations, or I'll be forced to reduce your Pacific fleet to scrap metal. Admiral, you're outnumbered 3-1. American reinforcements are already en route. A pause, then laughter. Torres, I have been monitoring American communications for the past hour. There are no reinforcements. Your entire Pacific fleet is committed to this engagement, and they are positioned exactly where I need them. He was right, and we both knew it. The Americans had rushed their forces into defensive positions without considering that they might be walking into a trap. Ready, Lieutenant Commander Chun announced. Spoofed submarine contacts programmed into Russian sonar networks. Do it. She pressed a series of keys, and on the Russian tactical display, new contacts began appearing. Los Angeles-class attack submarines moving in from multiple directions, positioning for torpedo attacks on the Russian surface fleet. The effect was immediate. Russian communications exploded with activity as ship commanders reported the new contacts to Admiral Volkov's flagship. Comrade Admiral, came a voice over their network. We have multiple submarine contacts approaching from bearing 270. Recommend immediate evasive action. How many contacts? 8. No. 12 confirmed submarines. Range approximately 6 nautical miles and closing. Through the tactical display, I could see the Russian fleet beginning to maneuver, moving from their carefully planned positions to respond to submarine threats that existed only in their sonar computers. Admiral Volkov is requesting authentication on the submarine contacts, Chun reported. Can you provide it? Already working on it, injecting false sonar data to make the contacts look real. But Volkov was too experienced to be fooled for long. All stations, this is Fleet Command. Authenticate submarine contacts through independent sensors. Report discrepancies immediately. He's going to figure it out, David said. How long? 5 minutes, maybe less. I looked at the tactical situation. The Russian fleet was breaking formation, but they weren't withdrawing. Volkov was too smart to fall for a simple deception, and once he realized the submarine threats were fake, he'd be angrier and more determined than before. We needed something more dramatic. Chun, can you access the Russian submarine communications? Which submarines? All of them. I want to send them new orders. Orders to do what? Orders to surface and surrender. David stared at me. You think Russian submarine commanders are going to obey surrender orders just because they come through their own communication system? No, I said. But I think they'll request confirmation from Admiral Volkov. And while they're requesting confirmation, they'll have to surface to use their communication arrays, which will make them visible to American forces, Sean said, understanding the plan. Even if they don't actually surrender, surfacing in the middle of a tactical engagement will look like ... Like they're abandoning their positions, I finished, which should be enough to break Volkov's tactical advantage. It was desperate. It was probably illegal under international law. And it was the only chance we had to prevent a shooting war in the Pacific. Do it, I ordered. But as Chun began programming the false orders, alarms started blaring throughout the Russian command ship. What's that? Martinez asked. The answer came from Lieutenant Commander Chun. Russian fleet is launching missiles. All of them. Volkov decided to attack before his tactical advantage disappears completely. On the display, dozens of red icons streaked toward American positions. The shooting war had begun. The next 6 minutes felt like 6 hours. Russian missiles streaked toward American fleet positions while our spoofed submarine orders created chaos in their communication networks. Half their submarines were surfacing to request confirmation of surrender orders that had never been issued, while their surface fleet was committed to an attack they couldn't recall. American fleet is returning fire, Lieutenant Commander Chong reported. Full engagement. On the tactical display, blue and red icons converged in patterns that represented millions of dollars of military hardware and thousands of human lives. The kind of naval battle that hadn't been seen since World War II. But something was wrong with the geometry. David, look at this, I said, pointing to the display. The Russian missile trajectories. He studied the screen, his expression growing, puzzled. They're not targeting the American ships directly. They're targeting the water around them. Warning shots? At that range? With that much ordnance? He shook his head. No, this is something else. Agent Martinez was coordinating with Pentagon officials who were trying to understand what they were seeing. Russian missiles are impacting in the water, she reported. No direct hits on American vessels. It's like they're intentionally missing. That's when it hit me. Volkov wasn't trying to sink the American fleet. He was trying to create the appearance of a naval battle while minimizing actual casualties. A show of force designed to demonstrate Russian capability without triggering full-scale war. He's still playing chess, I said. Even in the middle of combat, he's thinking 3 moves ahead. What do you mean? He wants the headlines. Russian fleet engages American forces in Pacific. but he doesn't want the body count that would force both governments into an actual war. The Russian submarines that had surfaced in response to our fake orders were being ordered by American forces, a dozen crews captured without a shot being fired. Meanwhile, the surface engagement was producing spectacular explosions and dramatic footage, but minimal casualties. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Admiral Volkov again. I took the call. This is Torres. Brilliant work with the submarine orders, Volkov said, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine admiration. I should have anticipated electronic warfare from the captured command ship. Is that why you're missing our ships with your missiles? Missing? He chuckled. My dear Torres, we are not missing. We are demonstrating. Your government now understands that Russian naval forces can engage American assets in their own territorial waters. The tactical balance has shifted. Toward what? Toward negotiations that will be conducted from a position of mutual respect rather than American presumption of superiority. Through the command center's windows, I could see news helicopters circling overhead. This battle was being broadcast. Live around the world, exactly what Volkov had wanted. Admiral, I said, you've made your point. How do we stop this before it gets out of hand? Simple. American forces withdraw to port. Russian forces withdraw to international waters. Both sides declare victory and begin diplomatic discussions about Pacific territorial arrangements. It was elegant, I had to admit. Volkov had engineered a limited conflict that achieved his strategic goals without triggering nuclear war. The kind of controlled escalation that great power rivals had been practicing for decades. And the compromised American personnel? The intelligence operation? A separate matter entirely. Those assets are already burned, thanks to your interference. Consider them a gift to American counterintelligence. The engagement was winding down. Russian missiles had stopped flying. American forces were maintaining defensive positions, and the submarines were surrendering to boarding parties with what looked like choreographed precision. Stand-down orders are coming through from both fleets, Lieutenant Commander Chun reported. Looks like the shooting's over. But as I watched the tactical display, I realized something that chilled me more than the prospect of naval warfare. This entire operation, the terrorist attacks, the fleet engagement, even our successful interference, had been planned. Volkov had anticipated every move, calculated every response, and engineered an outcome that served Russian strategic interests, regardless of how individual tactical situations developed. David, I said quietly, we didn't win this thing. What do you mean? We stopped the terrorist attacks, captured the intelligence network, prevented a shooting war. We did exactly what Volkov wanted us to do, every step of the way. 6 months later, I stood on the dock at Terminal Island, watching as the Neva Prospect was towed out to sea for disposal. The ship that had been a Russian intelligence platform was being sunk in deep water. Taking its secrets to the bottom of the Pacific. David stood beside me, looking healthier than he had since before his kidnapping. The FBI debriefing process had been therapeutic in its way, a chance to tell his story, to process what had been done to him, to understand that he'd been a victim rather than a perpetrator. Sarah's family was safe. The compromised veterans had been identified and were receiving treatment rather than prosecution. The Russian intelligence network had been rolled up and dismantled by any reasonable measure. We'd accomplished our mission, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been playing a game whose rules we didn't understand against an opponent who was always 3 moves ahead. You think he'll try something like this again? David asked. Volkov? Probably. Different approach, different tactics, but the same strategic goal, which is proving that American military superiority isn't what it used to be, that the world has changed and we haven't adapted to it. David nodded slowly. So what do we do about it? Same thing we did in Afghanistan. Watch each other's backs. Stay alert. Be ready for the next time, because there would be a next time. Men like Admiral Volkov didn't stop at one operation, and countries like Russia didn't give up on strategic objectives just because one plan had been disrupted. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, we were alive. Our families were safe. And thousands of American service members were going home to their loved ones, in a world where victory was often measured in degrees rather than absolutes. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it had to be.